You've found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic. To bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann. And welcome back to AHO Radio. Authentic Human Outliers Radio is here to offer our audiences comfort and support for being the genuine, thoughtful, amazing people that you are. To be a safe place to trade ideas without too much judgment, and to model what a real conversation, real dialogue, can accomplish. I'm Bill Protzmann, moderator and co-host for today's conversation. Joining us today, we have the co-host of AHO Radio and founder of Green Zone Hero and #Planet, John Krotec, along with Steve Morrison, creator of the Spiritual Workout, and Dave Brisbin, founding pastor of the Effect Faith Community. Gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Bill.
Great to be here with you guys. Our intention today is for this conversation to be thoughtful, succinct, and honest, to serve our audience by both cooperation and respectful disagreement as we join the process of living our way into the answers. Our commitment is to fully explore that process. And John and I want to thank you once again, Stephen and Dave, for your generosity and authentic participation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome and thank you.
In our conversation so far, we've discussed reaching through the internet addiction and AI algorithms to an authentic audience of outliers who purposefully isolate outside the noise of the media. We've also taken a deep dive into fear and trust. So today, the question of the week invites us to stand in our audience's shoes and take a close look back at ourselves. It's a question that can help an audience answer their question: how will I know when my teacher appears? And here it is. What role does humor play in authentic marketing? And sort of as a side to that, what kinds of humor does our potential audience find attractive and that we can skillfully engage? Okay, ready? Go.
It's a great question, and it's a deep question. And like all the questions we ask here, they mean different things to different people. Stephen and I were just smoking and joking. Some things that are funny to some people may not be funny to other people's, and science has shown that humor and laughter elevates the human spirit. There's different types of humor. We can go there. There's dark humor, there's satire.
Sure.
I think different organizations are going to adhere to different types of humor. But have you ever been somewhere in a room and you're around somebody that's really funny and they like elevate the vibrational state, and then you're standing around somebody that's like just a Debbie Downer? And no offense to Debbie's out there, but somebody that just, holy cow, I can't wait to get away from that person. So if we're talking about marketing, doesn't your company want to, if they decide to use humor as part of their, their strategy, don't you think they'd want to find something to elevate rather than to de-elevate? So it's a big question, and authenticity is definitely around the corner with it. So what is authentic humor? What are the types of humor? How does it raise vibrational states? And before we get started with Stephen and Dave, I just want to say that there's 3 books that I've read that sit on my bookshelf. One's called Laughter Yoga. It's by Madan Kataria. Really a good book, worth reading. The other one is Laughter Therapy. How to laugh about everything in life that isn't really that funny. And that's Annette Goodhart. And then Laugh Your Way or Laugh Your Way to Happiness by Leslie Lyle. Those are just 3 books. I always like to give out books. I know Stephen and Dave and you are hot on books. So those talk about laughter and the science of laughter and humor. And there are a lot of great ideas in there how to incorporate it into a strategy if you decide to use humor.
When I stop laughing, I'll put them in the show notes, man.
Yeah. I mean, and I got some great killer clown pictures. Maybe I won't show those because people are really scared they're scared of killer clowns, and I don't want to give a viewer a heart attack. So what do you think about those things, Dave? What do you think about humor and those types of things?
The first thing that I like to do is to try to define the terms. And it's like, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about humor? Why why is humor funny? What does it do to us? And I think for me, the thing that humor provides is a surprise. It's a shock. The typical joke leads you down a path. You think you know where you're going, but when you hit the punchline, it takes you someplace completely different. Whether it's a pun, that's often been said, it's the lowest form of a joke, or anything. Horse walks into a bar. Why the long face? It takes you someplace different. I think it's the surprise that changes everything for us. It instantly changes the context, instantly changes the environment, and it shocks you into a different place. I remember reading a science fiction novel, and it was Destination Void by Frank Herbert, and it was the spaceship actually achieved AI and became God. The last line of the book is, "Surprise me, holy void." And I was thinking about that. It's like, if you were God and you knew everything, absolute omniscience, what would be the thing that you prized the most? And I think it would be a surprise. I'm thinking maybe God created us in such a way that we can still surprise him or her. And that gives the most joy. And I think humor does the same thing. It gives us that surprise at the end. We think we know where we're going, and all of a sudden it shocks us into a completely different place. And what that does at the same time is completely disarm us. When you are laughing, you are not defended. And that creates the openness, that creates the connection. And obviously in any human interaction, that's going to be important. But if you think about it in terms of marketing, if you are undefended, then you are more apt to be able to find the connection with the message and hopefully press the buy button, But I think it's that aspect of a surprise that makes all the difference. And that's the starting point, I think, for talking about humor or talking about anything. What are we dealing with here?
A serious discourse on humor.
The
No,
paradox.
but I love that surprise factor. Dave, you made me. I've never thought about it like that. I never thought that humor was a surprise. I mean, like drinking a beer on the moon. What resonates, and I think that you hit the nail on the head. And I think people like to be generally surprised if it's a good surprise, if it's a fun surprise.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be like badgered by anything ever, especially not in the sales cycle, right? You get that, the used car sales like, well, what do I have to do to make this deal today, right? The opposite of surprise and the opposite of vulnerability just puts my defenses up.
Right.
I want somebody to say, hey, Bill, here's the keys. Take this car around. There's a gas station too on your check drive. Just fill it up. Here's a credit card, and I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. That kind of surprise opens you up to vulnerability. And it's even better when there's humor involved. The masters, I've watched the masters do this, and it's so beautiful to me that they're able to take situation A, which just looks so huge and terrible, and just there's no way to fix this thing. And in a moment, they have a question that transforms the landscape.
Right.
And maybe it's a funny question. Oftentimes it is. I like that. I love the scene from The Lion King. I don't know why The Lion King has stuck with me all these years, right? My kids watched it over and over and over. The scene stuck with me. And at one point, the wise old orangutan turns around and hits Simba over the head with his cane. Bam! And Simba goes, ouch, that hurt. And the wise teacher says, don't worry, it's in the past.
Yep,
right?
I remember that.
And there is that sort of wisdom that comes to great teachers. I can't claim to have anything like that, but I love it when it happens, right? It's just, I live for those moments of surprise. Stephen, I know you've been awfully quiet over here. You're trying to think of a joke to tell us, right?
Well,
He's got them.
Let's just stipulate to the fact that this person does not default to the humor place. I mean, I love humor as much or more than anybody. It's just not my natural go-to.
Yeah, it takes work, right?
We're in the business, yeah, and we're in the business, well, in a lot of ways it does, if you're trying to be somewhat serious about it and use it in an effective way. But so if we're in the business of personal transformation, I look back when I think of this subject, and I have completely transformed my own sense of humor in a way. So when I was sitting in graduate school close to 30 years ago, leaving a corporate world to become a psychotherapist, and some of the concepts in spiritual workout world that I still work with today, like judgments separate us, were percolating in my mind. And I can practically pinpoint back to that moment where I had the realization that my form of humor, which was mostly laughing at other people, right? Whether it's a comedian on the stage doing his bit, picking on this group or that one, or being a New Yorker metro area type person who's just drips with sarcasm left and right. And that's where all my humor always came from. Now, fast forward, I'm somewhere in my 30s, and I'm like, wait, I can't laugh at other people anymore? If I give up judgment, when and how am I ever going to laugh again? I won't. I mean, I really thought that. And I sat with that for quite some time. I'm like, oh my God, and now I can't laugh at other people. And when this super, famous comedian that I used to like is now doing his shtick, and I can't laugh anymore because his shtick is all about making fun of people and laughing at other people's expenses. And I don't think, at that point in my life that I really laughed at much else. So I definitely spent a few years wrestling with this whole idea and curbing it within myself first and foremost. Is this the only thing I can think to say that disparages somebody else? And then also wrestling with, I'm not sure I want to give this up. This is fun. It's just harmless, and I'm not really, And several years into it, and I'm a therapist, and then I'm a spiritual workout guy, and then it's like, oh, I found that I was laughing the hardest with other people who were sort of, my spiritual friends, my new spiritual friends. And so much of what we were laughing with just when we're hanging out with each other, which years earlier had been mostly focused on, oh, look at that one, look at that one, look at that one, was now focused on ourselves and our process. And, we talk about the effort and the struggle and personal growth, right? But there's so much humor inherent in all that. And yet it doesn't make sense to people who aren't in the same game, And now I like to say that it doesn't ever feel good to me to be laughing at other people, although we can laugh at ourselves and everything is situational. But I really do feel personally, just speaking for me, that my spirituality and my practice made me change my approach to humor. And another piece of that, and then I'll shut up, is, coming from New York to California, separate from everything I just said, on the New York side of things, we like sarcasm. We're reasonably strong, resilient people. We can make jabs here and there, and nobody's insulted, and nobody's upset, and nobody's, bothered. Go across the country, land here. Nobody appreciates that. Just nobody seems to appreciate it. And so,
it's a disconnect.
Yeah. And so suddenly, things that I would just say that would be a crack up where I just came from were not even remotely funny here. So that was another piece of it. But I really find that that concept of judgment is what sort of shifted my entire thing. And I know I didn't quite yet address the marketing piece, but
no, it's good because we've got to go down this rabbit hole for a second. When I was growing up, my grandparents and granduncles and aunts laughed at much different things than my parents did. And I find that I laugh at much different things than my parents, and then my kids laugh at things that are totally different from me. But one of the things that has shifted during the course of whatever, 40, 50 years now, 60 perhaps, is the things that we laugh at as a culture. And we're no longer laughing that hard at race jokes, for example. We don't laugh that hard at gender jokes anymore. There's this sensitivity that is pushing us in a better direction, to find a better form of humor, maybe, to find something that is genuinely funny instead of funny at somebody's expense. And hey, I love a good roast. I'll be honest with you about that. And when you're in that situation, the poor person who's going to be roasted knows there's an agreement, right?
Yes.
And so everybody's on the same page about that. It's not like laughing at somebody that you're denigrating in some way.
Or who isn't in the room.
Or who isn't in the room. Yes. So this all leads to the question I sort of have for the team here, which is what are the good forms of humor? I mean, how do we practice this with skill?
Well, that's a great question, and Dave raised the surprise, and Stephen has raised the cultural aspect of humor and what it means, and in personal transformation, but in business as well. If you want to have some great fun, go on YouTube and look up commercials from different countries.
Oh my gosh.
it is by far, you talk about cultural humor. Some of that stuff is just plain funnier than hell, and then some of it is just rude. And to me, looking at from my eyes, but we talk about, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, Bill, how you do. Some would say that type of shift in humor, this political correctness in humor, has taken away the resiliency of the human organism. And so there could be somebody that could say the exact opposite of humor, where humor stands in the world today. But I can tell you some of those commercials, and especially with as sexual as they are just, you play something like that in Des Moines, Iowa, something that the Japanese would play, and they would ban everything on television.
Right.
So how does political correctness enter into humor, and how does culture? I think it's, and how sensitive are we really, and how undersensitive can we be? And so it is something that marketers and companies really have to be aware of, especially with changing dynamics in society. But how far do we go with it? How far do we take humor into the political correctness realm, to where the person's really doesn't mean to make fun of that person or that culture or whatever, but they just are, And then if we hold everything with gloves, white gloves, are we really strong? Are we really being strong? I don't know. These are deep questions. Where does that play in all this? Where does political correctness play in humor?
Hey, Marie.
Well, I think, doesn't it all really come back to intent? I mean, to a certain degree, what are we intending? What are we intending to do with the humor? Well, now, when I was growing up in high school, if you were being teased, if you were being denigrated, if you were being, we called it choosed on, in high school, it meant that you were part of the group. That was kind of the sign and the badge that you were included in the group, and no longer on the outside. That you could take this, you were part of it, and then you could deliver it back. And so it was inclusive. If the intent is to denigrate another group and to try to elevate your group at their expense, well, that's a whole different thing. And so the difference, I guess, between derision and humor, yeah, we can laugh at derision, but it's really, the intent is different. And so if the ethnic jokes of the past and the, I don't know, dumb blonde jokes or whatever that are getting more and more banned here, because I agree with you, John, if humor disarms us and we're not willing to be disarmed anymore, if we're not willing to be just undefended anymore, then we're not going to laugh anymore. And most importantly, we're not going to laugh at ourselves. And I think that's the biggest problem. If we are so tightly wound, if we are so thin-skinned that we can't disarm ourselves, if we can't laugh at ourselves, then yes, we've lost something about our humanity. We've lost our ability to be vulnerable, which means we've lost our ability to connect with each other. And so, yes, there are bounds to the humor, and sometimes we cross them. But I think there has to be that ability to laugh at ourselves and see the humor in situations and see the humor in the differences between culture. I mean, really what ethnic jokes were about was the surprise of the culture clash and the way that just hit us. That was funny. You know, just like a pratfall is funny. I mean, you're walking along and all of a sudden you're down, and it's funny because you don't expect it, you know, as long as nobody gets hurt. And so it's like there is a fine line, of course, and we don't want to cross it. But what is the intent? I think that's gonna take us like a laser to what's humorous and what's just derisive.
I just, I love what you said, because my last name is Krotec, and it's not Polish, but we know about Polish jokes, right? So my dad used to just get so irate when somebody would make a Polish joke. I mean, he would get really PO'd, right? And I used to laugh about it. He would go, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "Dad, we're not Polish. What difference does it make if they make a Polish joke?" And so what I love what you just said, Dave, is that the human bond is legitimate when it comes to humor. And if we can't laugh at ourselves, and I mean, I never saw a human being got so mad. My dad was so intent on letting people know that he was not Polish that he would make a fool out of himself. And to prove that he wasn't Polish. And what difference does it make if you're Polish? Polish people aren't stupid, so it just, another example of how we allow sometimes. And I don't think the intent was ever to denigrate Polish people. I think it was just a form of humor. I mean, are Polish people really that stupid? And so I don't think so. So if we can't laugh at ourselves, then I think we run the risk of not being totally authentic. And of course, if the intent is to denigrate a certain class of people, or like Bill said, a gender or a nationality, then I think it needs to be checked. But if the humor is exactly that, it's just humor, and it's not meant to really hurt anybody in particular, then I think that I'm not going to say totally okay, but I think it lightens the blow a little bit more. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, you don't want to be offensive. John, you said something that was profound, and I don't want to miss this. The human bond is legitimate when it comes to humor, and the right kind of humor. Let's make sure that we're on that, because you don't want to be offensive. You're not going to bond with somebody if you're offending them. But I love that fact. If you are able to surprise somebody into that place of connection, that vulnerability just works. And how do we do that? I mean, that's the way. And believe me, I've bombed on stage more times than I can even begin to count, especially with jokes that worked one day and didn't work the next. It's like, come on, what's up with this? Was it the delivery? But if it's about me, I can usually get a laugh. And that's something that has stuck with me, right? That to be self-effacing seems to be the golden mean for me. Now, there are times where we can all laugh at some external thing, and that's funny too, like the sheep jumping on a trampoline, or, cartoons or whatever. But let's focus on the kinds of humor that are most powerful for us, acknowledging that as a culture, we've gone there, right? We've gone down the road of being offensive. We've gone down the road of political correctness, and we're improving. We're getting to a place where we can now, smoke and joke about this as four white guys, right? And that's a good place versus where we used to be. So what are the powerful, good kinds of humor? What is it that sparks surprise and sparks connection and all those things that we want when we're being authentic?
Well, obviously, I think the kind of humor that's going to spark connection is the kind of humor where we see ourselves in it. First of all, one thing about political correctness that I think is damaging is that sometimes we have to find out where the line is ourselves experientially. If we have a hard and fast law out there that tells us what we can and can't do, then we can't experiment. The way you know where the line is when you cross it and you pay the consequence for crossing it. And so sometimes, some jokes that go too far, then you realize, I crossed the line. I know where the line is now. It wasn't my intent, but here it is. And so I think that experience is really important for all of us to be able to experiment with this. But I think the humor that is going to bind us together is a humor that also illuminates something about ourselves. There's a car commercial on right now that just really hit me that I really liked. And it's two women in Zoom boxes, and it's a touchless car buying service. where you can just pick your car online and they'll deliver it to you. And the setup is that the two women are talking, and she says, well, you know, the buyer says, I don't know, you know, if what if I don't like the car? And she says, well, if you don't like the car, you can turn it back. She says, oh, great, then I'll have the convertible. And then the seller says, okay, when do you want it delivered? She said, how about Tuesday? Well, today is Tuesday. It's Tuesday? And she looks off camera, honey, did you know today is Tuesday? And just the way that she does this is so, it's so, you know, like you said, self-effacing, but we all know it. We've all been there, especially in the COVID world. What day is it again today? Tuesday, really? Did you know it's Tuesday? And she looks at the camera right as it cuts off. It's cut perfectly and timed perfectly. I think, you know, that is funny to me because it connects me. I've experienced that. I know exactly that feeling that she's going through. And even though it has nothing to do with the car, and I still can't tell you the manufacturer or the name of the company, but I remember the commercial. And so does it connect us to something human? Does it help us to be, as you said, Bill, to be self-effacing and self-deprecating at the same time? Again, it's laughing at ourselves, which also really just opens up that vulnerability.
Some great points.
Masterful commercial.
I also think that, you know, the more we talk about this, the more it seems that I don't want to overthink this, especially when I'm doing my work, right? So, I mean, so much of my marketing, we've been talking about like being on the menu, being available. So when people are seeking, they at least see options, right? So much of that is, for me anyway, I'm reaching people who are in pain for the most part, you know, various levels of it, some of it very acute and intense, and some of it just, I'm so sick of this, right? So the last thing I'm going to try to do for the most part is using humor at that level of contact and communication. And yet, and in any given dynamic class that I do, right? Same thing. Somebody comes on, they might be ugly crying and in the thick of it. And the next person might be a whole lot lighter. Now, maybe there's a place to use the humor with the person who's really in the thick of it. I'm not saying that that can't be. Oftentimes it can be. Oftentimes it's something that helps them in that moment, and we connect because, to you guys' point, like sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. Yeah. And so I'm not afraid to do it, but as I look back at experiences and listen to how we're talking today, I can't ever plan any of it. It all has to be authentic and spontaneous and in the moment. And again, like I started today, I don't see myself, I'm not the guy who's trying to be on stage and getting everybody to laugh. I've had some experiences doing that, and it's certainly fun, but I don't see myself as that guy, and I don't put myself out as that guy. I've written a book on grief and loss. It was very personal and very spiritual work at me, right? And somebody, you know, says, not only was this an impactful, powerful book, blah, 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 but it made me laugh out loud. I'm like, fantastic, you know? And the same thing, like there was in my regular spiritual workout class, and I always see myself as being reasonably intense and serious because I'm meeting people, they're bringing their own selves, you know, that's our job, right? To just kind of be right there. And there was a guy who was attending classes regularly for a while, but sort of sitting in the background. I didn't even really know he was there half the time. And then his close friend, who'd been an active person, she said, oh, he thinks you're hilarious. He just laughs the whole time. And I'm like, oh, all right, that's great. You know, so he's getting some sense of my humor through the thing. We're talking about serious stuff, but some of the feedback I get is, oh, you're funny. I'm like, wow, all right, that's great. I'm really happy for that, but don't even tell me because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be trying to do that in this particular realm. So
to take all of us out of our teaching role for a moment and put us in our marketing role, the advice that I got when I went out to do, you know, SEO and all of that was, well, what do you teach? Well, what do you fix? What's the problem you fix, right? So it's depression, stress, and anxiety. That's fine. Okay, so we got to write articles about depression, distress, and anxiety. and we got to SEO everything for depression, distress, and anxiety. And pretty soon I was in this giant dark place of depression, distress, and anxiety. I'm like, this may be the kind of person that I want to attract. Here I am building this monolithic depression, distress, and anxiety page, and there's so many others that are all doing this. I want to differentiate myself. I want to be the go-to guy, but I don't want to be thought of as the I can't even say it anymore, distress, depression, and anxiety guy. I want to be thought of as somebody else, right? I want to be thought of as the guy that opened the door to vulnerability with a surprise. So is what we're saying here that we need to reach in our marketing into a kind of humor that creates that moment?
Well, that again, that's a great question. And Dave and Steve have certainly raised some really nice issues and concepts to think about. But, we're trying to evoke a certain human feeling, right? And, a need and a value and all these things. Well, take clowns, for instance. Clowns are hilarious.
Why did you bring that up, John? What were you thinking?
No. Well, they're funny as hell to some people. And some people, they scare the literal crap out of them.
Yeah.
The movie It and all that crazy killer clown stuff. And so there's a fine line, because some people might think those killer clowns are funny. I remember I wrote a poem when I was like in the 10th grade, hanging out with the guys, and the guys were telling jokes about gay people. And the title of my poem was, I Hate Being a Guy, because I didn't really like being around stuff that I didn't think was very funny. And guys would talk about their girlfriends and laugh about certain things. And that was part of my poem too, that I didn't think any of that stuff was funny. And as somebody read my poem in the 10th grade might have thought I was just, over the, out of it, not with it, not hip, not being, but those kinds of things weren't funny to me. So I think that there is a fine line. We can certainly overthink it, but if we overthink it too much and we don't allow ourselves to be human, we might take it to the place where we don't want to be, where there's no humor, where nothing is funny. And what would a kind of a world would that look like? I go back to what Dave said at the outset. I think it really boils down to the intent. And I think that any time that you're trying to put somebody down in a malicious manner, it's not a good thing. It just isn't a good thing, and like you, Bill, I did not want to be known as the man or the boy that was sexually assaulted. Hence the reason I kept my mouth shut in the 4th grade and told nobody, because I didn't want to be labeled that guy. But that guy is what's going to propel me, and what has propelled me to be who I am. And I can't deny the humor in some of this. If I take myself too seriously, then I run the risk that I'll never attract anybody. Oh, that guy's just a downer. All he wants to talk about is childhood sexual assault. So I have to find a way to elevate the vibrational state. And the only way I can do that is to look in the mirror and say, listen, man, I love you. And I laugh at that sometimes. I actually still look around because I'm not used to saying that to myself. So if we can look at ourselves and say, you make me laugh and you're funny as hell, maybe it breaks the ice and we can use humor in a way that becomes authentic, not overthinking it, Stephen, and not being so white gloved with it, Dave, that we laugh at nothing. So how we label ourselves and how we label humor, I think it's different for different people. But the crux of it, again, for the umpteenth time, it's intent. What is your intent? If your intent is to get more customers, then you certainly, in the self-actualization realm, we certainly don't want to denigrate people that we're trying to attract. But at the same time, we don't want to be so overly cautious that we never laugh about anything.
I've been in thinking about humor and something that I've thought about before. I've been on a presence kick for the last, 2 months now. And because I've realized that the presence is really everything to our spiritual formation and just to our lives, really. The best you will ever feel is when you are completely present. Presence defined as undistracted, that you are completely here now. and presence plus awareness of your circumstances around you is the fullness of what we're here to do. But when you think about, when you hit the punchline of that joke, or you see that image or whatever it is that's funny, and you start laughing, especially if it's a laugh from your toes, a real head thrown back, eyes closed, what are you thinking about at that moment? You are completely undistracted. That surprise, that punchline has just wiped the slate clean. You are completely here and now. And that is the most pleasurable feeling as a human that we can experience. So when we make someone laugh, and comics will talk about this, often it's an unhealthy thing, a compulsion for them, but they talk about, just the sheer joy of being able to make someone laugh. But you've given someone a completely pleasurable moment, and you're sharing that with them. And so, yes, as a marketer, as just a human being, it's one of the true points of connection that we can have with each other. So even if we're talking about heavy things, like you guys are saying, hey, we're in the business of dealing with people at their worst. But if we can have a moment, if you can make someone laugh in your session, you have given them a vacation from all the junk that they're there to talk to you about. And that is great. If we can string enough of those little vacation moments together, guess what? We hit the 51% mark, and we've changed our character. We've changed our mailing address. And so that's really what it's all about, is creating enough of those moments, and humor can help us to do that. Whether you're marketing something or whether you are just helping someone or whatever you're doing. But, further, I think that the humor has to come naturally. You said that, Steve. It comes most authentically when it comes spontaneously. It comes out of the situation. So that's going to happen naturally as we're just talking and being funny, even if we don't consider ourselves a funny person, because I don't either, Steve. But sometimes something just comes up in my head that is that kind of a non-sequitur. And if I say it, and I say it at the right time with good timing, it's funny. And you can't necessarily plan that. But I know that when I was studying creative writing, our teacher said, when you're plotting a story, you can't deal with just what's possible, because anything's possible. You got to deal with what's plausible, if you're really going to hold your reader, if they're going to see any legitimacy in what you're doing. And I think our humor has to be the same thing. It's got to be plausible. It's got to come out of the situation. That car commercial I was just telling you about. Well, the Tuesday thing was relevant to what you're doing. You got to schedule the delivery of your car. Those Geico commercials with the little gecko, I think those are hilarious, and they work so well. But the gecko comes from Geico, and there's a connection there. Other advertisers have tried to use animals, but they have nothing to do with the subject matter. And you can feel the stretch. You can feel them trying to copy the success of someone else's success, and it just falls flat. And so what is it that comes out of the situation naturally? And what is it, if you're planning the humor, that is plausible to the situation, so that it all connects? And somehow intrinsically we know that in the back of our minds, even if we don't, we couldn't express it, but it's there. And it creates that disarming moment, that moment of pure presence.
So let's unpack that a second, because here we are in the business of encouraging people to do deep, scary work that they will learn how to do, and then they will have to do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again for the rest of their lives. It's like, we're going to take the lid off of the boiling pot of ugliness here, and that's the way forward, right? So how do we engage, with the terrible irony of exactly what it is to do the real authentic work? I mean, that's a terrible sell. Yeah, it's monkeys. It's what it is. I mean,
well, no. I'm thinking about your question. I'm thinking these chimps behind me just heard the best gorilla joke ever, right? And it reminds me of the Frankie Goes to Hollywood song, Relax. You know that song, Relax? Frankie Goes to Hollywood, right? I think we need to just relax. Gorillas are tough. They can take a good joke. Humans are tough. Regardless of if it's denigrating or not. You made me think of something. And of course, we would never tell a denigrating joke. These chimps might, but think about it. Let's just relax a little bit. We're tough. Humans are tough. Now, of course, that doesn't mean let's go out of our way to put people down constantly at the expense of them or to humor us. But let's realize that humor is a basic human condition. It's a basic human emotion. And both Stephen and Dave have both hit upon the seriousness of it, but also the over seriousness of it. And let's just chill out a little bit. Humans are very resilient. And I love what Dave said, that if Stephen's in a session with one of his clients, and it's a serious session, but Stephen is able to evoke a humorous response, that's a good thing. Humor is a good thing. And let's just say we're offended by some humor, then we just need to remember what Frankie says, and we just need to relax and maybe take a lump and get over it, because tomorrow's another day. I'm not saying, because humor does it, to me, most humor elevates. And in those moments that it doesn't elevate, like Stephen said, it's kind of experimental. We don't know when it's going to really offend somebody. So you don't know until you try it. I, for one, would like to think that humor is a good and useful tool. And I personally would like to do what Dave said. And my intention with it is to elicit and evoke a response that's of value to the people that are hearing it. The gorillas that are watching these crazy chimps may think differently, but I would seem to think that a silverback gorilla is pretty tough, and I'm sure these chimps don't bother him one bit. Just saying.
Yeah, I think laughter laughter is connected with humor, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. There's something in Christian circles called holy laughter, and it's considered one of the kind of a charismatic gift, where laughter is just the response to the spiritual encounter at the time, and there's no joke necessarily. But I remember I was at retreat. I was at Sarah retreat, and my custom at the time was at night when everything was done, I'd go for a run. And I'd run down off the top of the hill, and I'd run through the darkened neighborhoods. And this one night, there was just such a sense of presence. I felt like if I turned my head fast enough, I could see the Lord running with me. It was that kind of moment. And there was a full moon. And as I was coming back and cooling down, I looked up at that moon, and it was just the fullness of the situation. And looking at that perfect moon, I just burst into laughter. And I'll remember that I remember that so clearly, because it was just one of those moments that was just spontaneous like that. I think there's an element to humor that invokes laughter, and laughter being that pure presence, but you can't help but being grateful. You can't help but having these feelings of that there's purpose to life somehow, that there's a reason I'm here in that moment. You're not going to articulate it that way, but it's kind of what's going on, I think, inside, which is why laughter is so precious to us. And if we weed it out of our social, interaction with each other, if it gets to the point that we're so serious and taking ourselves and everything so seriously that we cannot laugh anymore, we're dead as a people.
We're close, you guys. This is a huge job, because the kind of humor that's out there right now is so sarcastic. And for clarity, audience, we're not talking about that. That's not the humor that we want to use effectively here. So let's take a transformative approach. And somebody's all into sarcasm. So Stephen, you live this, right? And then it changed. So can you kind of like walk us through what that change was like from where you were to where you are now, and then touching on the holy laughter that you mentioned, Dave? What does that feel like as you're transitioning, and what happens?
The choice to largely drop sarcasm for me personally was, it just wasn't appreciated, right? So you don't appreciate sarcasm. I do. I love it. I love, when I hear it, I respond to it, but I'm living in a universe or a piece of geography, let's say, where it's not so appreciated culturally. So I made an active choice to just kind of let it go. I'm turning people off. I'm being perceived in ways that I, do not like. So there's that. That was the piece for that. The transformation on the judgment piece was, again, just like, what have I got humor wise if I'm not on purpose just laughing at the expense of other people? That transformation was one about just moving out of judgment and into compassion. You know, if I want to be a compassionate person, can I still do what I'm doing? And I think that, and I just want to tie one thing that I think is underneath a lot of what we're saying, and about, you know, being willing to use humor, right? Being quote unquote authentic and spontaneous about it. And I think what's underneath that for us as practitioners is really just allowing it, right? So when we are as open and connected as we can possibly be as we do our work, to me, it's more a question of simply allowing it to be one of the things in the room, right? We've got our issues, we've got our approach to dealing with the issues, and we've got this thing called humor, which is going to have a role. So I want to intend to be open and willing to for that to emerge as and when it does. You know, I think there's another just little extra piece for us in there that has to do with that. And I don't think I answered your question.
No. I think this is living our way into the answer. So do you have ways that you practice humor? Like, do you strengthen your humor muscle by doing, I don't know?
No, in fact, I feel like I almost don't even want to talk about it, because that takes me out of the authentic, spontaneous way of doing it. Like, even thinking about it as much as we have in the last 45 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, what's going to change?
That's the answer I wanted. You know, because it does come from that place of surprise, even surprise for us, you know, like in a room and something will happen, like you were talking about it, and you make an observation, or Dave, you had this great sense of timing. And it's like somehow being able to think ahead to the next thing when you're in the flow, it just is there.
Yes. And I think that today, one of Dave's earlier points, the surprise, what you started with, Dave, right? So I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think we've all got some degree of this. As I occupy the role that I occupy as therapist type practitioner, the person to whom somebody is coming with their stuff, sometimes a humorous response, a humorous statement, whatever, because it's coming from me as the practitioner that I am, creates the surprise.
Yes.
What did you say? You said that? You know, like, I don't think that people are holding me in any, I'm just me, right, doing my work. But the fact that I am me doing my thing, let me put it in a different realm. So I'm a gay man, right? And I was at a social thing one day, and I was with mostly straight people, and this straight couple, they were the hosts of the thing. And it was, I don't know, somebody walked by, and I made the kind of comment that a fraternity boy would make about a woman. And it was just, I knew that it's only funny because I'm saying it, right? That surprise thing. It's like, and the words that came out, and the phrase and the thing, the shock on their faces along with the spontaneous bursting out of laughter, it was like, all right, I nailed that one. And it was not funny. If my friend had said it, it wouldn't have been funny at all. It was only funny because it was coming from me in that particular thing. And I think that, at least for me in the work I do, has to be a part of it. And of course, you know, strategically placed. But I have a sense that that's why sometimes people might think I'm funny when I don't really put myself out. Am I making sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Isn't that the truth of it, though? I mean, we are the context of our joke. We're the setup to the joke.
Exactly.
In a very real sense. Okay, you know, Stephen's a gay man. I'm a pastor. You know, someone has come up to me and say, giving me the reasons why they missed church or something, or you know, why they weren't able to do this or that, and I'll just say, "Oh, you big baby," and then, you know, later on it says, "You know, you're being a big baby about this," and that has become kind of a standard line with me. And as I was talking about experiencing when you've crossed the line, there's some people it works with great, And then there's some people that I have to apologize and never say that again, you know. But it'll just come up naturally because. But if it works, we all understand that, because I've made my excuses for things that I didn't want to do at the time, and they're making their excuses, and we all, you know, we're in the elevator together. We're the only two there, and so we understand what's going on here, and it can be that great disarming moment, and it's humanizing again, you know. I'm not in a power position over them as a pastor. They don't need to make their excuses to me, but it can work or it cannot work. But again, we're the context. We can make that joke funny if they know who we are. One of the biggest laughs I ever got on stage, it came out of one of those moments, and I was the MC and also part of a musical touring group, and we would tour all over the state of California. And at one performance, the leader of the group kept calling at the very end, country song after country song after country song. I think we did every country song that we knew. And everybody in our group knew that I am not a particular country fan. And so we're doing song after song after song. When finally it was time to end, and I stood up there and I said, well, you know, I don't know about you, but that was enough country to last me until my T-bills mature. Now, it got a big laugh in the group, but the leader who was sitting at the sound booth, he about fell off his chair because the context was perfect. And just that moment. And that's it. It's we can be the surprise if we say something that's out of character, if the intent is to connect. You know, you're being a big baby about this. The attempt is to connect. If a person is sensitive enough and I've misread the situation, then it's still going to be offensive, and I got some fences to mend. But I think it's still important for us to be able to experiment and to see how far the bonds of our relationships can go, because just the possibility of having that moment of just laughter and complete presence and that bond that John was talking about, I think it's worth a few missteps here and there. But if our intent is right, there won't be as many of those.
Yeah, you hit upon something really cool, you know, comfort zones. And in the world of, you know, self-help or self-actualization or healing, you know, we've read so many times that, you know, you've got to step outside of your comfort zone. And what you've solidified for me, Dave, is I'm going to go back to think love. You know, what is your intent? And if my intent with my interaction with people, if it's a core value of thinking about love, I don't think I'm ever going to say anything that would be disrespectful in a non-humorous way. And if it is that way, like you just said, the situational things that happen, maybe it's a good thing that humor in a non-denigrating way takes people out of their comfort zones. I think that what you guys have pointed out to me today, and I learn something every time I come on here, you know, both of you guys, because you guys are experienced in dealing with people. I've learned that humor is a valuable tool. And Stephen, the fact that you say you're not humorous, man, I think you're pretty funny, and I think it's in a great way, not in a disrespectful way. I think your heart's bigger than most guys I know, and same with you, Pastor Dave, and Bill, the love of people. And so maybe we need to use humor in a way that takes people outside of their comfort zones, as long as the intent is what's in this skull behind me, this head, this brain, with love at the forefront. Maybe there's something to that. And you guys have certainly struck a chord with me today, for sure. Yeah.
Amen. Yeah, I'm nodding my head here and feeling pretty joyous. As a matter of fact, I woke up this morning with a lot of anxiety, and that's changed just as a result of this conversation. You know, have you guys ever seen those groups where people just get together and they just laugh? They do anything else except just hang out and laugh together. Nobody tells a joke. Somebody just gets started, and the laughter is contagious. And it's like an hour of just laughing.
Well, you know, there's some science behind that. They say that, that laughter elevates, I don't know, you guys probably know more about this than me. What is it, endorphins? That laughter elevates something like that. Pheromones, I don't know. You know, everything's funny to somebody in a different way. But you know, you're right, Bill. They say that laughter actually elevates the human organism. something in the brain, it kicks off. And, you know, and I'm like you, Dave, if you can't look at yourself in the mirror and laugh every now and then boy, what a sad state of affairs your life must be, because I do some of the stupidest things and it's embarrassing. And sometimes when my wife laughs at me, it kind of pisses me off. But when I go behind closed doors and I start thinking about it, I go, man, that was really funny. And then I'll go back and I'll say, hey, honey, sorry, I was such a jerk. But, you know, but that was funny. So yeah, what a useful tool. Humor and laughter and authenticity and marketing and human beings interacting, and you guys with what you all do. Phenomenal. You know, the four guys right here, especially you three, could change the world, and you are. And I'm just thrilled to be part of that. And that's not funny, that's real.
John, if we didn't have you, our little square here would tip over to one side. So thank you for
telling me that.
For sure.
No, I love you guys. I'm telling you, I really do. And
we love you
guys.
back.
I'm gonna be thinking about laughing all day today.
Sounded like the setup to a joke for a second there, John. Four guys walking to a conference, you know. I was thinking that also laughter is a good teaching tool. And if you look at a Zen teacher, or you look at the way Jesus taught, and if you really analyze Jesus' teaching, never answering a question with an answer, you know, always answering a question, or with a complete non sequitur, with a story. You know, even when the followers ask Jesus, "Where are you going?" he says, "Come and see." You know, he's never just going to give them the answer, because he realizes that the thought process the student is on, the person is on, is the problem. And so you got to break that and get them into a completely different space, encourage them to take that quantum leap where they kind of wink out of existence over here and come in over here, because they need that very process broken. And humor can do that. And Jesus was humorous, except we don't get 2,000-year-old Aramaic humor anymore. We don't get the way that it works, but it's there. And many scholars have pointed out how the wordplay in the original language and how this and that was the way that humor was practiced at that time. So we don't see the humor, except maybe, you know, take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your brother's eye. We can have that mental picture and see how that works. But Jesus was in the habit of teaching like a Zen master, who is going to break that line of thinking. There are stories of the Zen student who is meditating, and the teacher comes up behind them when they sense that they're right on the cusp of enlightenment, and claps, you know, right behind their head. Or a thunderclap will do the same thing to break them into a new level of thinking. And the teacher is constantly trying to do that, to sense when the student needs to have that line of thinking broken and moved over. And I think that's what humor can do for us as well. And so in session, when we're working with people, to break that line of thinking at that moment can be so useful as a precursor to introducing a new concept, because the mind has been cleared for an instant. And so there's a lot of depth to this in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
Stephen, any final words of wisdom here? I realize that these conversations could go all day, and I love them. They are so incredibly important. Just for my own personal selfish reasons, thank you guys for changing my affect today. You know, that's a beautiful thing. You didn't know you were doing that, but there you are, you have. So Stephen, any words of wisdom from gentlemen? I'm not funny either. I feel you when you say that, but every so often, humor's in the room, and you get to be the conduit for it. So from the guy who, like all of us, is not funny, final words of wisdom.
Well, you know, I'm thinking we were going to talk about humor in marketing, and where I'm coming out with this is we're all going to use humor. We do use it. We're maybe funnier than we think, and that's all well and good. And yet, with this conversation, am I trying to put jokes in my actual marketing? Is that the first thing that I want somebody to see when they come in? I don't know. I'm not convinced on that level yet. I don't know that, because that's so much of what we're saying is it's situational and it's spontaneous and it's authentic in the moment, which is not what our marketing is. Our marketing is anything but that. You know, one day when I have a large budget, I'd love to just let's try a whole marketing comic marketing approach to spiritual workout, you know, keeping it light, keeping it breezy, and see what happens. I mean, I'm not saying that wouldn't succeed, but I feel like the humor, at least in the work that I'm doing these days, is more of what's going to come up once you're sort of in there. I don't know that I'm going to hook people in with humor in quite that way. I mean, that's where I would leave that. I don't know.
I love it. I mean, the honesty that's involved in this conversation is always something that's meaningful to me. And yes, how do you know the way forward when the way forward isn't even clear to you? Right? I find myself in that place so much of the time. And if I can laugh about it, it helps.
Well, again, you know, your whole thing here is being authentic. And so that's really where, you know, where it all comes out. I'm authentically going to say this thing because I think it's funny right now. I think it's going to work. And hopefully it'll land. And if it doesn't, then we've got another issue to deal with. You know, in my world, it's like, oh, you just got triggered. Well, 3 cheers for triggers. Let's work on that. I mean, that's just information for you. And, you know, I didn't do anything to trigger you on purpose, but there you are. And so there's, you know, there are other ways in to even deal with when it doesn't land, depending on the situation. But
sure, often recovering from a failed joke can be funnier.
Yeah, sometimes.
Right?
That's true. You know, I just want to thank all 3 of you guys, and thank you, Bill, for doing all the technical aspects of our show.
Yes, Bill, thank you.
Yeah.
And for the listeners that have, you know, hung with us these last few episodes, we want to thank you. And I would just challenge listeners to think about 3 things personally that you find funny, maybe about yourself, and maybe about others, and maybe if you do some inner work on humor to begin with, you might be able to crack the ice and really bring some humor back in your life, which I believe Dave hit so eloquently, that with humor in our lives, we become more human. And if you're going to be humorous, try to do it in a way that's non-judgmental or non-denigrating, and have some fun with it. But I know that every single human being has at least 3 things that's funny about them, and you know, search those out and discover those, and maybe on your road to self-actualization, you'll actually be able to pepper some of this humor into your daily lives, and, you know, and make your lives even more fulfilled. So you guys have definitely schooled me on some things, and we can still learn it even at this stage of the game. Thank you.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
Anything that you want to offer to sort of wrap this all together from a Christian perspective? And I'm asking that on purpose.
From a Christian perspective,
Yeah.
The whole point of following Jesus is to find a way to remain vulnerable in any circumstance, because vulnerability is the precursor to connection. If we are not undefended, we can't connect with another person. If our walls and defenses are up, our shields are up, we don't connect. Presence is all important. To be present, to be vulnerable, to be willing to connect. Humor breaks down the defenses naturally. It's a natural way of happening. But if we're not willing to be undefended, if we are so afraid, so fearful, then we can't laugh. You know, fearful people can't laugh. Nothing is funny. You know, the whole aspect of the warrior in a very tense and clear and present danger, harm's way situation, who can still laugh. You know, we see that in the movies all the time. You know, it breaks the tension. It allows us to have the courage. It allows us to have the faith to move forward, even in uncertainty and in fear. Humor is absolutely essential as an aspect of what it means to be a follower of Jesus in the deepest sense.
So are we kind of all saying, lighten up, people? There's heavy work to be done. I mean, or
enlighten up.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Stephen, your check's in the mail.
I've heard that one before.
Oh
That's
my
funny,
God.
Bill. That's funny. No,
Right,
saying.
right. So, okay. Thank you guys. I mean, seriously, once again, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I am so moved and encouraged by the conversations that we've had. I look forward to having more of them. I don't know what our next topic will be, but gosh, Dave, Stephen, thank you so much for your candor and your insight and being willing to be honest here on this crazy thing that we call the conversation and live our way into the answers together. And also, thank you to our sponsors. Can't do this without you, Green Zone Hero Music Care. Thank you, thank you. And John, co-host, thank you, brother. Love you. Thanks for being part of this. And most importantly, to everyone out there, our audience, thanks for listening and watching and subscribing and ringing the bell. Until next time, I'm your co-host, Protzmann, AHO. Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected. And, as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO. AHO.
Oh.